Every parent wants to give their child the best start in life, yet few are prepared for the depth of struggle that often comes with parenthood. The pressure is real. According to recent studies, over 70% of parents report feeling judged for their parenting decisions, and a staggering 65% of parents admit to feeling unprepared for the emotional challenges that parenting brings. It's like entering an endless balancing act, where every decision feels like it could either build up or break down a child's future. I remember when I first became a parent, I truly believed that love would be enough. I thought the pure joy of welcoming a child would be my driving force, and that everything else would somehow fall into place. But life doesn't always follow our expectations. The sleepless nights, the daily exhaustion, the strain on my own sense of self-worth, these hit me harder than I ever thought possible. At times, I felt trapped in a reality that no one had warned me about. I felt like I was failing. One night stands out clearly in my memory. It had been a long day, one of those days when you're barely holding it together. My child had been sick, the bills were piling up, and I felt like I was running on empty. As I rocked them to sleep, my mind started replaying every decision I'd made that day, scrutinizing each choice and berating myself for what I could have done better. That whispering voice of doubt in my mind seemed to grow louder in the stillness of the night, saying, "You're not doing enough. You're not good enough," end quote. I sat there feeling like a failure, convinced that I was ruining my child's life in ways I couldn't even comprehend. It became a cycle, one that was hard to break. I found myself obsessing over milestones, comparing my child's growth to others, feeling guilty for the times I needed a break. I was terrified that every small flaw in my parenting would somehow create a ripple effect that would follow my child for life. The weight of wanting to be perfect was crushing, yet I couldn't escape it. The hardest part was how alone I felt in my struggle. Everywhere I looked, other parents seemed to be handling things with grace. Social media was filled with images of picture-perfect families, with smiling parents and kids that seemed to have it all together. No one talked about the meltdowns, the doubts, the tears behind closed doors. And every time I saw those images, my self-doubt deepened. I kept thinking, why can't I be like that? What's wrong with me? The guilt became all-consuming. If I ever raised my voice, I'd beat myself up about it for days. If I missed a school event because of work, I'd lie awake at night, imagining my child feeling hurt or abandoned. Every time I saw them with a sad look or heard them cry, a wave of shame would wash over me. I think this is my fault. I should be better. The pressure to be a perfect parent felt relentless, and it seemed like every small misstep was a glaring reminder of my own flaws. Eventually, the strain started to affect my health. I was tired all the time, yet I couldn't sleep. I lost interest in things I once loved. Anxiety became my constant companion, lurking in the background of every day, whispering doubts and fears. My relationships started to suffer, too, as I pushed people away, convinced that they couldn't possibly understand the pressure I felt. And worst of all, I felt like I couldn't reach out for help, because admitting I was struggling felt like admitting failure as a parent. There was a moment, one that I still remember so vividly, that finally forced me to confront my struggle. I was at the playground watching my child play, when another parent struck up a conversation. She looked so calm, so put together, and I thought, she probably has it all figured out. But then out of nowhere, she opened up about how hard things had been for her. She talked about her own guilt, her own moments of feeling inadequate, her fears of not being the parent her child needed. I felt a lump in my throat, and before I knew it, tears were welling up in my eyes. In that moment, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one feeling this way. We were all just doing our best, all struggling in our own ways, and that was okay. It was a revelation that struck me to my core. I wasn't failing, I was just human. And being human meant having limits, making mistakes, and learning to carry on despite them. Reflecting back on those days now, I realize that every tear, every moment of doubt, every sleepless night has been part of my journey as a parent. It hasn't been perfect, far from it, but maybe that's exactly what it's supposed to be. Because in my imperfection, I've learned to be more compassionate, not only with myself but also with my child. And in letting go of that need for perfection, I've discovered something far more valuable: the ability to be present, to forgive myself, and to focus on what really matters, loving my child with everything I have. As I stood there at the playground, finally feeling a hint of relief in the shared experience with another parent, I realized that my journey toward self-acceptance as a parent had to start right there. I needed to let go of the impossible standards I'd set for myself. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, and I knew it wasn't something I could do alone. But that small moment of connection, where another parent had openly shared her own fears and struggles, sparked a determination in me. I was going to find a way to be the best parent I could be. Not by striving for perfection, but by learning to embrace my flaws and do the best with what I had. The first step was simple but profound. I stopped comparing myself to other parents. This was much harder than I anticipated. Everywhere I looked, it seemed like others had everything figured out, and it felt almost natural to measure myself against them. But I had to change that mindset. Instead of focusing on how I measured up to others, I began focusing on how I could be present with my child in each moment. I tried to stop worrying about whether I was enough and started tuning into what my child needed right then and there. It was incredible how that simple shift lifted some of the weight from my shoulders. With that small progress, I also started practicing what I now call intentional parenting. Rather than letting self-doubt guide my every choice, I made an effort to pause before reacting. If I felt overwhelmed, I would step back, take a breath, and remind myself that I didn't need to get everything right. I didn't need to have all the answers, I just needed to be there. I started allowing myself to make mistakes without self-blame, and to see each mistake as an opportunity to learn. One night, after a particularly challenging day, I remember sitting down and acknowledging to myself that it was okay to ask for help. This was another huge step for me. I'd always felt that as a parent, I needed to figure things out on my own. I thought reaching out for help was somehow an admission that I wasn't a good enough parent. But I started looking into parenting support groups and online resources, finding comfort in the knowledge that I wasn't alone. Joining these communities connected me with other parents who were also learning to embrace the messy, unpredictable journey of raising children. Just knowing others understood brought me a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. As I grew more confident, I began looking for tools and strategies to manage my stress. Mindfulness became a lifeline, helping me stay grounded and focused on the present moment. I learned that I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be there, fully, with love and patience. Meditation and mindful breathing practices made a huge difference, giving me a way to release tension and refocus my energy, so I could engage with my child without carrying the weight of self-doubt. Through all these steps, I started noticing a positive change not only in myself but also in my relationship with my child. There was more laughter, more connection, and less tension in our home. It was a shift I could feel in my bones, a sense that I was on a path to becoming a better parent by embracing who I was, flaws and all. I began to see that being good enough was exactly what my child needed. But what helped me the most in my journey was discovering the Imperfect Parent's Guide. Embrace your flaws and focus on raising happy, healthy kids. This book completely transformed how I viewed parenting. It offered a perspective that was liberating, encouraging me to embrace my imperfections, understand my worth as a parent, and celebrate the love and care I was already giving my child. It became more than just a book. It was a companion, a reminder that perfection wasn't the goal. Instead, creating a loving, supportive environment mattered most. The book provided clear, actionable steps that helped me replace self-criticism with self-compassion, and I began to understand that parenting is about progress, not perfection. For anyone struggling with the weight of parental expectations, I highly recommend grabbing a digital copy of this life-changing guide on LibriFFY.com. The link is in the description. Continuing from where I left off, I was just beginning to feel a little more at peace. After that moment in the playground, I kept thinking about what it truly meant to be enough as a parent. I went home that night and sat down with a notebook, writing out all the ways I felt like I was falling short. But for each fear I wrote down, I tried to counter it with a small positive step I could take. I jotted down simple things like, take a deep breath before reacting, give myself grace, and focus on what matters right now. That was the night I started to shift my approach to parenting, not by any drastic measures but by making one small change at a time. The idea was to let go of perfectionism by starting with patience for myself, even if it meant forgiving myself for being impatient earlier in the day. Each night, I would sit down and write something new I learned about myself as a parent. It might have been a simple observation or a moment when I'd chosen to react differently, but it helped me build a better picture of who I was as a parent, rather than focusing on who I thought I was supposed to be. The biggest change came when I stopped comparing myself to other parents, especially those on social media. I didn't even realize how much time I had been spending scrolling, looking at what other parents were doing, and using that as a measuring stick for my own success. It was as if every photo and every story made me feel like I was falling short. One day, I finally decided to take a social media break. It was hard at first because it had become my go-to distraction, but soon I started to feel lighter. Without the constant comparison, I was able to focus on what mattered. My child and our journey, not anyone else's. With the newfound space in my life, I began practicing what I started calling intentional parenting. The concept was simple but incredibly powerful. Instead of letting my insecurities drive my decisions, I made a conscious effort to be fully present with my child, to see each moment as an opportunity to connect rather than judge myself. When I felt the need to be perfect creeping in, I would pause, take a breath, and ask myself, what does my child need from me right now? This shift made all the difference. There was one moment when I had just finished a long day of work and came home feeling utterly exhausted. My child was waiting for me with a drawing they'd made, eagerly wanting to share it with me. In the past, I might have smiled and nodded while barely looking at it, distracted by everything else on my mind. But this time I knelt down, looked at them, and asked them to tell me the story behind the picture. That simple act of being present turned a small interaction into a memory. I could see the joy in their eyes as they shared every little detail with me, and I realized that this was what they needed: my presence, my attention, my love. But as freeing as it was to practice being present, there were still challenges. I was still dealing with the guilt and the self-doubt, that nagging feeling that I could be doing more or doing things differently. The hardest part was letting go of the idea that every misstep I made would somehow impact my child's future. I would lie awake at night, wondering if I'd said the right thing, if I'd handled a situation correctly, or if my stress had somehow affected them. It was exhausting. One day, I decided to look for more concrete support. I started reaching out to friends, even joining a few parenting support groups online. It was terrifying to open up at first, but sharing my fears with other parents who had their own doubts and insecurities was surprisingly comforting. I remember one parent in the group who said, "We're all in this together," and those words struck me. It was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't alone in feeling like this. I wasn't the only one who sometimes felt lost, even in the most ordinary moments. Slowly, I began incorporating small moments of self-care into my routine. This might sound like a minor change, but for me it was a revelation. I realized I couldn't be fully present for my child if I was running on empty. Self-care wasn't about spa days or weekends off. It was about giving myself permission to rest and recharge, even if it was just 5 minutes of peace and quiet with a cup of tea or taking a short walk outside to clear my mind. Those little breaks gave me the energy and patience to show up for my child in a way I hadn't been able to before. As I grew more confident in my journey, I realized I needed a tool to help me stay grounded. That's when I discovered mindfulness. Learning to focus on my breathing, even for a few moments, was transformative. It was a way to bring myself back to the present whenever I felt overwhelmed. I remember one particular night when my child was having a meltdown. My instinct was to feel stressed, to rush, to fix everything. But instead, I took a deep breath and tried to just be there. I held them, breathed with them, and let them feel whatever they were feeling without judgment or hurry. In that moment, I realized that being calm and present was one of the best gifts I could give them. The challenges were still there, but they became more manageable as I grew more intentional. One day at a time, I was learning to embrace my imperfections, and that made me stronger. I no longer needed to be perfect. I just needed to be a loving and supportive presence for my child. Over time, the guilt started to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence in my ability to parent authentically. I was no longer constantly questioning myself, and I was learning to celebrate my wins, however small. But the most impactful change happened when I stumbled upon the Imperfect Parent's Guide. Embrace your flaws and focus on raising happy, healthy kids. This book was more than just words on a page. It felt like a warm hand guiding me through every step. It encouraged me to release the burden of perfection and find joy in the present. The guidance it offered was gentle, reminding me that my best was enough and that my love was more powerful than any ideal I had been striving for. This book provided me with practical steps, helping me realize that true parenting is about showing up, imperfections and all. The Imperfect Parent's Guide gave me new tools and a fresh perspective on parenting. With each chapter, I felt less alone, more grounded, and more capable of embracing my unique journey. I highly recommend it to any parent feeling overwhelmed or inadequate. For anyone ready to discover a more joyful, balanced approach to parenting, you can grab a digital copy on LibriFFY.com. The link is in the description. Let this book be your guide as it was for me, helping you embrace the messy, beautiful reality of parenting with grace and confidence.